Confessions of a Failed Southern Lady by Florence King, published 1985. Chapter 2. Being a great believer in roots, Granny wanted them to live with her in Boston, but Herb needed to be near the big downtown hotels and clubs, so they moved to Northwest Washington and set up housekeeping in a two-room apartment on Park Road, conveniently located around the corner from the 11th and Monroe streetcar line. The building was a former townhouse whose owner had been ruined in 1929. Unable to afford an architect or a contractor, he had converted the place himself, evidently while still in shock. Mama and Herb had a triangular foyer with the front door on the hypotenuse, an L-shaped kitchen with nothing in the windowless short leg, and a Tudor priest's hole in the bathroom that led to a back porch where Mama kept a wringer washer. To do the laundry, she had to get down on all fours and push the basket through ahead of her. The only convenient feature was a hall that ran down one whole side of the unit, making it possible to reach any room without going through any other. When Herb got home from work at 2 or 3 in the morning, he could get to the bathroom or kitchen without going through the bedroom and disturbing Mama, who was a morning person. He read until sunrise, and went to bed around the time she got up. Her idea of breakfast was coffee and cigarettes, so Herb cooked his own bacon and eggs. Her other specialities, culled in bridal haste from Depression-era newspapers, were mock chicken salad, which involved a can of tuna fish, and mock salmon loaf, which involved a can of tuna fish and a bottle of pink vegetable coloring. When Herb, oblique as always, suggested a mockless Friday, she fixed him a hot dog. She got pregnant shortly before their first anniversary. The news brought Granny to Park Road on winged, energetic feet. "I was worried about you being alone at night, what with the hours Mr. King keeps," she said as she sailed in, "so I decided to come and stay with you until the baby is born." Great believers in roots are seldom great believers in luggage. Granny had never owned a suitcase, and looked down on people who did, calling them gallivanters. Hooked over her wrist was an old Landsberg's shopping bag, containing a couple of extra house dresses, 6 pairs of pink rayon drawers XL, 6 pairs of orangey service-weight stockings, an extra set of shapely stout corsets, and a curling iron that had to be heated on the stove. Herb bought a roll-away bed for the living room and adopted to her presence with awesome nonchalance. Their mutual preference for the formal mode of address elevated the situation to an eerily civilized plane. Going into a kitchen filled with the smell of scorched hair to find a 200-pound mother-in-law in a cloud of steam, he merely said, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Redding," to which Granny graciously replied, "Good afternoon, Mr. King." To everyone's benefit, she took over the cooking. Ever solicitous of male comfort and well-being, she fixed all of Herb's favorite dishes: boiled cabbage, boiled potatoes, boiled Brussels sprouts, and bœuf à l'anglaise, or boiled beef. When he happened to mention that he liked grilled kidneys for breakfast, she put on her hat and went immediately to the store to buy some. In exotic moods, she fixed her 2 gourmet specialties, chili and shrimp curry, omitting the chili powder and the curry powder, respectively. Her explanation? "We don't need any foreigners around here." Herb agreed. There's nothing like good plain food. He gained 10 needed pounds, and the marriage gained a needed buffer. Being home in the daytime had thrown him together with Mama in a Garden of Eden intimacy that neither was equipped to handle. They had never known what to do with themselves in tandem, and now there was the problem of entertaining a pregnant tomboy. Washington was full of interesting things to do, and Herb had a nose for finding obscure free exhibits and lectures. But Mama would have none of it. The Smithsonian bored her, The Library of Congress was too quiet, and the National Gallery was full of dumb pictures. It was their courtship all over again, with the sobering addition of an embryonic tie that binds. So Granny arrived just in time. Now Herb could go off by himself during the day without feeling guilty. He left the apartment after his noon breakfast and threw himself into the most innocent pastimes in the history of husbands. The time slugs on his reading room slip were his bond. Mama spent the day eating for two, smoking for six, and listening to Granny's obstetrical lectures. It was the tiny garments subdivision of delicate down below. Descriptions of dilating 1, 2, 3, 4 fingers. The tragedy of poor Alice Langley, who dilated 4 fingers and stayed that way. Her husband started chasing other women. Stretch marks, varicose veins, calcium deficiency, a tooth for every baby. Tubal pregnancies, breached presentations, 10-month babies that never got born, babies strangled by the cord, the woman who delivered placenta previa, and the woman who delivered a watery mole. The Stygian cereal acquired another raconteuse when Granny ran into Jency Custis on 14th Street. Jency was a black woman who used to work for Granny in Boston. Now she was living in Washington and doing freelance cleaning, so Granny hired her to clean the Park Road place once a week. When Jency saw Mama's swollen ankles, she let out her ooh-wee of fright. "You got the dropsy, babe?" she asked ominously. Before Mama could reply, Jency launched into a story about the time her midwife mother had officiated at the birth of a 16-pound monster born with an exposed backbone, webbed feet, and its face on top of its head. "Jency, you remember the watery mole, don't you?" asked Granny. "Oh, yes, my sure does," Jency said with a nostalgic sigh. "I cleaned for that lady's sister for years." "What's a watery mole?" asked Mama. "It's a baby that never becomes a baby," Granny explained. "The doctor called it a human deliquescence. It's just lumps of slime held together by stringy bands that would have been the bones and muscles." She shook her head in wonder. "It was the only one ever born in Virginia. Ain't been one like it before or since." They were like two good old boys eulogizing a favorite hunting dog. Granny and Jency belonged to the Babies Are Women's Business School of Obstetrics, whose first rule was, throw out the men and get to work. When Mama said she was planning to have the baby in a hospital, they recoiled in horror. Jency, a font of Puritanism, sucked in her lip and gave Mama a look of heartbroken disillusionment. "Is dis my sweet pear child I hear talking about going to a hospital? Miss Louise, you don't want men's messing with you at a time like that, does you?" Granny, more devious, used the excuse of our aristocratic heritage. "Louise, giving at birth at home is the only way to be sure of getting the right baby. Suppose you got some trashy woman's baby by mistake. It wouldn't have any blood. Hospitals get the babies mixed up all the time, you know. Of course, they don't dare admit it, but I have it on good authority. Those nurses are so busy having things to do with doctors that they can't think straight." "Dat the truth. Dem nurses is like the flesh pots of Babylon." "Many nurses are insane, you know. They get so jealous from having to take care of other women's babies that their minds go. They get even by deliberately mixing the babies up." "Dey lip strip, honey, but dey strange women's." "As for those identification bracelets," Granny said scornfully, "they're so cheap and flimsy they just break and fall right off. Did you know that, Louise?" She did now. She reached for a pack of Luckies, her fourth that day, and tore off the cellophane strip. She had heard every obstetrical caveat known to science and myth except the one about the smoking during pregnancy. For all of Granny's strictures on ladylike behavior, no one ever heard her utter a word against smoking. Tobacco, after all, comes from Virginia. "Louise, promise me you'll have the baby at home. We'll get Tessie Sutterfield, and Jency and I will help her." Tessie was a retired obstetrical nurse, but never a fleshpot, who lived in Boston. "All right, Mother, I'll have it here. Now leave me alone. I want to listen to the World Series." Except for taking the sun on the bathroom porch, by crawling through the priest's hole, Mama got no fresh air or exercise. Whenever she tried to go out, her keepers set up an outcry. Did she want to miscarry? Suppose she fell down and hit her stomach like Pauline Fairfax when she leaned over to pick up a dime and couldn't stop. Didn't she know that walking during pregnancy put pressure on the bladder? Suppose it burst and the baby drowned? Did she mean to walk past that firehouse with all the men sitting out front with their chairs tilted back and them looking at her and knowing? Her combative instincts, dulled by pregnancy, Mama gave in and spent the day lying in bed drinking pot liquor until she was as fat as Granny. Around this time, Herb bought another roll-away cot and set it up in the short leg of the kitchen. There, amid his library books and copies of the National Geographic, he slept, leaving Mama and to her ash-strewn sheets. Granny called his action considerate and told everybody in the daughters until the telephone wires buzzed with that ne plus ultra compliment old ladies bestow on sexually restrained men. He never bothers her. As the pregnancy neared its end, Granny began casting eager glances at Mama's stomach. "It's going to be a girl," she said firmly. "How the hell do you know?" "Because you're carrying low. Boys are carried high." "I don't have any low or high left. The goddamn thing's all over the place. You're talking through your hat, Mother." At the start of the 9th month, she saw a bluish tinge in Mama's navel. From this curio of whelpery, she extracted what she wished to believe and manufactured an instant old wives' tale. "The navel vein," she intoned sonorously. "That means it's a girl. You never find a navel vein in a woman who's carrying a boy, but a girl baby always brings one on. You see, when a girl baby turns around inside the mother's stomach, she always pushes up against that vein." "With what?" "Miss Louise." On New Year's Eve, Mama started to feel certain twinges. It was the biggest night of the year for Herb, so Granny told him to go on to work. He returned the next morning, expecting to find a baby in the apartment, but Mama was still in a holding pattern. 4 days later, her labor began in earnest, and Granny called Tessie Satterfield. Raw-boned, crop-haired Tessie arrived amid repeated backfires in her ancient Model A. Mama sent Herb to the drugstore for 2 cartons of Luckies, but by the time he got back, the first big pain had hit and she had bitten a cigarette in 2. It was to be 6 hours before she would be able to smoke another one, a hiatus that goes far to explain why I am an only child. Around 10 p.m., her waters broke and Granny put together another legend. "Look at all that water. That means it's a girl. You never get that much with a boy." "Whatever it is sure is big," Tessie grunted. After all the horror stories Mama had heard, "whatever it is" was an unfortunate phrase. She let out an agonized yell that sent Herb running for the bathroom and me into the world. Nobody who smokes 4 packs a day can yell very long without coughing. As her gothic ululation changed into a phlegmy rattle, Tessie broke out in triumph. "I see the head. Keep coughing, Louise." "Agh! Here it come. Ah!" "It's a girl," Granny said ecstatically. "Ah!" To some of us, it spells mother. Nobody remembered Herb until Jency ran into the bathroom to get more towels and found him sitting on the edge of the tub with his head between his knees. They scared each other silly. "Ooh-wee!" or "Blimey." She told him the news and ran back to the bedroom with the towels. It was time for the placenta, a holy relic as far as Granny was concerned. When it came, she gathered it lovingly into a towel. "Look," she murmured reverently, 9 perfect little sections of blood, one for each month of the lady's missed time. Look at that." Herb emerged from the bathroom during this gynophilic litany, and hearing the word "look," he did. "Crikey, it's dead." "Oh, no, Mr. King, this isn't the baby. It's the afterbirth, see? 9 little perfect—" "Take it away," he groaned, staggering against the wall. Overcome, he headed for the bathroom again, with Granny and Jency trailing behind him reciting old wives' tales. "The afterbirth has to be disposed of in a certain way, Mr. King. The husband has to bury it. It's his duty." "Flush it down the loo," he gasped, between heaves. "Oh, no, Mr. King, you can't do that. It's birth blood. You supposed to bury it on a dogwood tree so it bloom in the springtime and bring the child good luck." They kept following him around with the bloody towel and chanting hex stories until he gave in and agreed to give the placenta a proper burial. After fortifying himself with a shot of whiskey, he borrowed a shovel from the janitor and went out into the alley. He told Granny and Jency that he dug a suitable grave, but years later he told me that he had thrown the sacred object into a garbage can. The next day, "It's a girl," Granny said tenderly, gazing down at my red, wrinkled face. "Mother, you said that 7 times in the last hour." Granny got up and stood at the bottom of the bed and gave Mama an appraising stare. "Louise, how do you feel?" "My ass hurts." "That's to be expected. I mean, how do you feel?" "All right." "Well, you don't look all right. You remember Nancy Montgomery? She thought she was all right, too, and then her ankles exploded. I think I'd better stay until the end of January." At the end of January. "I'm worried about your varicose veins. You remember Betsy Winchester? She got so she looked like a road map. I think I'd better stay until the end of February." At the end of February. Mama ignored her protests and went out to the store. "You remember Fanny Wellingford? She died in the A&P. "I never heard of Fanny Wallingford, and neither did you. I'm sick of being cooped up in this apartment. I feel fine." "Be that as it may, I think I'd better stay a while." It was a fatal regional vagary. Southern homes are full of people who are just staying a while. When Evelyn Cunningham took 2 years to drink a glass of milk, Granny told everybody that she was just staying a while. That unparalleled tactile experience of stepping on a human face in the middle of the night lingers like a moist legend on the southern foot, because someone who was just staying a while was asleep on the floor when you padded slipperless to the bathroom. Sears sells more camp mattresses and foam rubber pallets in the South than anywhere else in the country. Southerners buy more adhesive tape than anybody else, not to bind our wounds, but to make extra name strips for the mailbox so the postman will know who is just staying a while. The most challenging jobs in America are with the Southeastern Regional Office of the Bureau of the Census, and there's always plenty of overtime. As Herb would later tell people, the longest-running comedy in the history of the American theater is The Mother-in-Law Who Came to Dinner. It opened on Park Road in 1936. Granny never officially moved in with us. She just stayed a while. Nor did she ever go back to Boston and pack the rest of her belongings. That would have been an open betrayal of her Virginia roots. Loath to let anyone actually see her moving, she announced that she was just staying a while and asked people to bring things to her. Each time our relatives and friends visited us, they brought over another dress, another pair of energetic laced Oxfords, more rayon drawers, and those crocheted headscarves known in Granny's youth as fascinators. One week, Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Botetourt brought over a hat. The next week, Dora Madison produced the veil, and the week after that, Evelyn Cunningham showed up with the stuffed bird. It went on for more than a year, but nobody ever suggested that Granny had moved. They simply pulled another size 44 from a Landsberg's shopping bag and said, "Since you're staying a while, I thought you might need this." Thread by thread, button by button, they put Granny together again. The tactful transfer reached its climax the day Dora brought over her one-eyed fox fur piece, and Aunt Charlotte appeared an hour later or so with the creature's missing eye. Everybody knew what she was up to. Expecting Granny to stay away from an unformed blob of female material was like expecting a cobra to stay away from a flute. For listening, I thank you.